If one examines for a second, or if one tries to define the proper noun American, one will discover, first of all, that to be an American means a catalog of virtues. We have something called I Am an American Day, which I gather is meant to reassure everybody. And to be an American in these terms apparently means, check me out, you think about it. Apparently means that though Greeks, Armenians, Turks, Frenchmen, Englishmen, Scotsmen, Italians may be corrupt, sexual, unpredictable, lazy, evil, a little lower than the angels, we are not. Quite overlooking the fact that the country was settled by Englishmen, Scots, Germans, Turks, and Armenians, a little later to be sure. Every nation under heaven is here. And not, after all, for a very long time. I think that it might be useful, in order to survive our present crisis, to do what any individual does, is forced to do, to survive his crisis, which is to look back on his beginnings. The beginnings of this country, it seems to be, it's a banality to say it, but alas, it has to be said. The beginnings of this country have nothing whatever to do with the myth we have created about it. The country did not come about because a handful of people in Europe, various parts of Europe, said, I want to be free, and promptly built a boat or a raft and crossed the Atlantic Ocean. Not at all. Not at all.
Check the mic and make sure it sound right, boys.
Gregory Brian Cooke.
Hey, Robert Wesley Brand.
Good morning to you, brother. How you doing today?
I'm doing well. How are you?
Pretty good. Now, are you a native Chicagoan?
I am. Born and raised outside. You know, my grandparents came up in the 30s in the Great Migration.
Right.
So, yeah, I've been here a few generations.
So where did your grandparents come from in the South? What state?
My grandmother came from Mississippi, Greenville, Mississippi. My grandfather from Garyville, Louisiana.
Garyville, Louisiana. Wow.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That's your grandfather's
side. My maternal grandparents.
Maternal,
and,
okay.
You know, I was really close to them. I grew up in a 3-flat building.
Mm-hmm.
So my family, my mom and dad, we were on the second floor. My grandparents were on the first floor.
Mm-hmm.
You know, really the first 18 years of my life, I was always in seat of my grandparents every day. So they were a huge influence and presence on me. Their perspective, that presence, is a magical quality in just being there. And when I needed something, I was fortunate. My grandfather, even when I got my car towed at night because I was someplace I wasn't supposed to be as a teenager, he would come and help me out.
Right. So right there, like, you and I don't know each other that well. We're going to get into all of that, like how we met and all of that. But even what we've just talked about so far on your maternal side, coming from Mississippi and Louisiana. Now, my mother and father come from a small town outside of Pittsburgh called Braddock, right? A steel mill town back in the day.
Braddock.
Yeah, Braddock. From General Braddock, right? My mother's father So my grandfather, my maternal grandfather, like your maternal grandfather came from Garyville, Louisiana. My maternal grandfather came from Mentor City, Mississippi. So that's down there with your maternal grandmother.
Right.
That's where he came from, Mentor City, Mississippi. So he came from a family. This is my maternal grandfather, after whom I'm named. He was Otto Wesley Kimbrough. I'm Robert Wesley Branch. So I take my middle name from him. Now he comes from a big family from Mentor City, Mississippi. When they migrated from the South, they went to Chicago. So I have a huge base of family, or did at one time, in Chicago. My grandfather, after whom I'm named, comes from his brothers and sisters all settled in Chicago when they came from Mississippi. And he went to Pittsburgh. All that to say our families have crossed somewhere.
I'm sure.
Yeah.
I know in the DNA, my brother did that online DNA, and our family passed from North Carolina first.
Some way, those paths crossed.
Mm-hmm.
Now, did your brother get his, do you know if he got ancestry DNA? Did he get African DNA? How much does he know about the African origins of your family? Or do you know about that?
He did. I know the Ivory Coast, Benin, Togo, and Ghana were the three countries where we are from.
Right. That's about where that's all in that same Gulf of Guinea slave trade coast. Back in the day, like that's all them countries line up. I'm just a little lower than you. Gabon, my father's side comes from, Gabon. And my mother's side comes from an island called Biko Island, Bioko, right off the coast of Cameroon. There's this island called Biko Island, and that's where her people come from. So she's from the Bubi people, B-U-B-I. That's my mother's side. And my father's side comes from the people in Gabon, the Togo and the Teke and the Kota people, which all of this I found out through AfricanAncestry.com. I did the Ancestry.com first, but then there's an African company too that does it. They can get you down to your tribes.
Wow, okay.
Yeah.
I want to know. I want to find that out.
Yeah.
Myself.
A lot of people don't, they're not interested. They don't want to give their saliva for DNA, and I get all of that. I totally get it. When I've met people along the way, brother, in different professional settings, and you just listen to them tell their stories. These are non-black people. Many of them that I've run across know where they come from. They can tell you what grandfather did this and grandmother did, and they can go back because of their history from Europe to America. And the way that passage happened for their family, they can tell you even back to Europe and what was going on there. See, we can't do that. We can't go back to Africa. Like that part of our history is lost to us pretty much because of everything that happened in our passage, in the Middle Passage. The more research I do, you end up stopping because the records aren't there. It's just not there for us.
Yeah. Just when I go into other communities, I can't help but feel that there's a part missing for us, a connection and identity, something that we can draw on that is not rooted in what happened to us here. The history of it is trauma, basically. So,
right, exactly. Exactly.
Almost at every point, we get into a time machine. It's like, I don't want to be here. No, I don't want to be here. So.
And what do you think about this? I want to get your thoughts on this. Being an American, not even taking it down to the detail of an African American. Our sense of freedom, we just feel, and I think have felt free from some of these things that we would perceive. And I'm speaking for myself. I just want to get your thoughts, though, that we perceive would happen in, let's say, what we would call a third world or an emerging or developing country would be dealing with things like that, that we as Americans wouldn't see ourselves dealing with, and the rest of the world wouldn't necessarily see us dealing with. It makes you think about what it means to be an American. That's what I want to get your thoughts on.
That idea, there's definitely a sense of it can't happen to us, that we're special, and we certainly are privileged, and we have a lot of resources. And there was definitely that thought that, those countries, they don't have the hospitals, they don't have the capacity, or whatever sort of magical thinking that we have about who we are. And especially this notion of individuality, and it's the other person's responsibility, but actually we're connected. It's a myth. I think if anything has been shown through this is that, this idea we have that this rugged individualism is just nonsense. And we see all of the failures or fractures or weaknesses in our society, the social safety net.
Yeah, it makes me think about what it means to be an American, particularly after this whole incident of January 6th. We can get into that or not later. But it really, again, the question comes up. What does it mean? Like all of my ideas about America, being American, like what does that mean? A lot of it for black people is unchanged because we have always known things and had a reality that a lot of non-black people don't have just because of history. So we know some things. We always know when it's going down and we know what it is when we see it, right? You know, we know what we're looking at.
Right.
But real quick, back to what we were talking about. So on that level, what it means to be an American. So let's go a step deeper and we're talking about being an African American. Is that a term that you use to describe yourself or do you use black? How do you talk about you?
I use African American, that term, to describe myself. That's what I am.
Right.
And the reason in the entirety of my experience for myself and my ancestors has been because we were African people. And the laws that we had to live by, all of that was because we were African people. So, yeah, that's how I identify myself. And black is fine. I say that too, but African American for sure for me.
Let's talk about that. So how in your heart, how close do you feel to Africa, to the continent, to the land? And that continent is full of, as we all know, many countries. So what it means to be African is a whole, series of conversations right there because it's not one thing. Like that's the biggest landmass on the planet. It's so diverse is my point, as we all know. So how closely do you feel connected to Africa as an African American?
My goal in 2020 was to take my first trip to Africa. That was one of the things that was on the list. And of course that didn't happen. But I feel every culture, there are things that I don't even understand, language and culture, that even though we lost a whole bunch of who we were, is still rooted in Africa. So that part of it is a natural, organic connection that I feel. Even before I knew what tribe or country my people had come from, I felt that was a connection. And then a few years ago, I had written a screenplay, and when I started, I wanted this uniquely American thing. And as I was thinking about what's uniquely American in the entire world, is African American people. And so you rock and roll and hip hop and jazz and all of the art and poetry and how it drives culture. And from Stevie Wonder to Michael Jordan to Muhammad Ali, and I don't know that there are other countries that have, and I know we do the celebrity thing here in America, but to just have these personalities, they can only be because they were these African people who came to America. So that's something that's uniquely American to me, the things that we do in the world. But it wouldn't happen. You couldn't come from Italy and America and be this special, unique thing. You had to be African and American. So there's that understanding that lets me know I couldn't be me without Africa.
And
that makes sense.
It makes perfect sense, brother. And when you think about those Africans who came to America in the era that I believe you're speaking of, back in the day, our ancestors, I think of, as I hear you talk about that, the Africans that I know that come from Africa today to live in America. Because what I find is that some of the brothers and sisters, I'm thinking of Brother Kwame, who is originally from Zimbabwe and now lives in Johannesburg in South Africa. And I'm thinking of a woman that I used to work with at Discovery Channel, Zanelli, who was originally born in South Africa. I think she's Zulu. No, she's Xhosa, because she can do the clicking. This was fascinating when I first met her, brother, because she can do the clicking. You know how you hear the clicking in the back of the throat? Like if you're not from that tribe, if you're not Xhosa, you can't do that. I don't think Zulus do that. So anyway, through knowing them over the years and listening to them, and when I knew another brother named Gabriel that I met in Paris who ended up coming to America to visit, I remember him saying, just sitting in front of the Capitol, the monument, saying, this is like a dream come true for me. So their ideas of what it means, at least the people that I'm talking about, of what it meant to be an American, I had to really think, because a lot of this I take for granted. I was born in Washington, D.C. I grew up there. I see the monument all the time. So sometimes these things we can take for granted.
The mythology of America is pretty powerful. The simple things like the peaceful transfer of power, which we had seemed to have a pretty good handle on until January 6th.
Right.
That's significant, that we can have an election and then folks go, okay, we lost, and move on. We take that for granted that it happened. I can't imagine, I guess, what it would be like to come here as a person from Africa with all the media programming that you've gotten about this country and
Yes.
black people.
Even when I first went to Paris and met African people living in Paris. So I'm, as a black American man, meeting black African men speaking French, not because they're French, but because they're from Senegal. And that was, colonized by the French, so. Yeah, so meeting each other and talking to each other. I'm looking at them and they're wearing New York Yankee baseball caps. That's how we met, because I thought they were American. So that was interesting. And then getting to know them and talking to them and going to their houses and being around them and hearing their stories, I realized that at least for the people that I knew, they were coming from, one of them's father was an airline pilot for like Senegal Airways, so I was talking to people in their country who were middle class, who were able to send their children abroad for education. I realized that early on, that I was talking to a certain level of African brother in Paris, right? Yeah. Now, that being said, brother, this will never leave my mind, this story. Then we're going to go back to some other stuff. I want to know what you were taught and told and saw and experienced about African people when you were growing up in Chicago. That's what I want to get to. But first, I want to say this, that even though I knew I was dealing with a brother who came from an upper or middle class family in Senegal and was now studying in Paris, thinking of this one brother, Brother Gabriel. When we went on a train from Paris to Amsterdam on a train, when they came by I guess would be what do they call him? Not a porter, but the man who takes the tickets.
Oh, the ticket.
Yeah, the ticket master, him. When he came by, yeah, exactly. When he came by to look at passports and tickets, my brother that I was with was sitting on the aisle, so he showed his first, and he was from Africa. So when he opened his was from Senegal. I mean, it just took forever. I thought the brother was just gonna bring out a microscope and go on every single page. It was embarrassing. I was embarrassed for him. It was the equivalent of us getting pulled over on the side of the road for no reason, because we got profiled.
Sure, yeah.
And I'm sitting next to him going, oh my God, I was embarrassed for him. And he's keeping his dignity, as a lot of African brothers will. He kept his dignity the whole time. We both knew we were black men at that time. But here's the thing.
Right.
When they were finally finished and he asked me for my passport, I pulled it out. I had it waiting, and he saw that it was a U.S. passport. He just waved it off. He never even took it out of my hand. He waved me on. And I thought, oh my God, I'm okay. Not because I'm black, because I'm just as black as this brother next to me, but because I'm an American, he ain't fucking with me. He ain't even looking. Now, this was in the 90s. That probably wouldn't happen today, but I'm telling you, this was in the 90s, 1994 when this happened. So he didn't even take my passport out my hand. And that's when I knew, brother, that the perception of a black American, at least from this particular white European man, was that black American was better than black African. Now, forgive me for my language, but this is what it is. In my mind at that moment, I thought, okay, see, he's the nigger of Europe. They treating him like a nigger.
Right.
Straight up. They not treating me like a nigger, but they are treating him like a nigger.
Second class.
Yes.
Always subject to scrutiny. Yeah.
So even though he was from a middle class, in my mind, middle class family in Senegal, studying abroad, the Europeans, the ones who colonized him, were still treating him like a nigger. But not me. He ain't mess with my American passport. Didn't even look at it. Didn't even take it out of my hand. And I thought, oh my God. Which was funny for me because I was expecting, see, this is what goes on in the mind of a black American man, or at least this one. I was expecting, Brother Gregory, that they were going to treat me the same way. I'm born and raised in Washington, D.C. So I just thought, okay, now it's my turn. Never happened.
I'm sure because they see folks, African people who are coming from Africa, as trying to, probably the same way that not me, but some in our American society see people from South America and Central America, like you're coming in to take something. You're trying to immigrate here and turn us into something else. I'm sure that the whites in Europe see black Americans as they must be successful if they're here. And they're not coming here to take anything because they have stuff because they're already American. So,
what did you see? What did you hear? What were you taught? What were you exposed to? What was your experience of Africans, people who were living on the continent, when you were being raised a young boy in Chicago, on the south side of Chicago? Were there African enclaves of people, of Africans who lived in different neighborhoods? What did you see?
There were, but they weren't on the south side. So the Africans who were in Chicago, the recently immigrated folks, they lived up north. Really growing up in Chicago till I went to high school, I lived in an all-black neighborhood. So there were a few people I would see. Had a few white teachers, and I played tennis. So I would go out to this place, and I would interact with some white folks out there. So it was just African Americans who were here. So I didn't have a lot of exposure. My aunt traveled to Africa when I was probably 6 or 7, and I saw all of her pictures, and it looked very not as developed to me as America was. There were street vendors, and all the roads weren't necessarily paved the same way they are here in the photos. So that was really my exposure. That, and in the history books, you know, and I guess maybe in Black History Month, we learned some of the kings and queens and learned about some sub-Saharan cultures. But, yeah, it was very limited. So, yeah, I didn't have a lot of perspective until I went to high school. And there were some folks whose parents had immigrated. There's a guy named James Asiambi who was in my class. And so, and that was really the first interaction that I had with African people who had just come to America. And they were different. There's a sense that I did notice having to prove that you belong here. And I had never really known that because, I belong here. Like, we were in the fields in Tennessee and Mississippi. And so, I guess that was one of the things I did notice as a teenager, that they didn't have that sense of, I belong here. This is mine just as much as it is anybody else's.
And that, I'm speaking for them in my imagination as a writer. I'm making up a story now based upon what you just said. But now I understand how you could feel like, because in your mind, if you're coming here, right? I'm thinking of just my migration from one part of Maryland where I lived for 16 years, Bethesda. And I'm thinking of that drive that I made that night, early morning, to come here, changing my whole life, to come here 3 hours later to live at the beach, right? So that's a small migration, but it's a migration. It's a life-changing experience nonetheless. And on that drive, I'm remembering what my life was and had no clue what my life was becoming. And I'm sure some of those same thoughts go through your mind when you make a passage. When people made that middle passage from whatever generation and from whatever culture, I'm leaving something to go to something else because, and James Baldwin said this beautifully,
the people who settled the country, the people who came here for one reason, no matter how disguised. They came here because they thought it would be better here than where they were. That's why they came. And that's the only reason that they came. Anybody who was making it in England did not get on the Mayflower. This is important. It is important that one begin to recognize this, because part of the dilemma of this country is that it has managed to believe the myth it has created about its own past, which is another way of saying that it has entirely denied its past. And we all know, if we think about it, what happens to a person who was born, let us say, where I was born, in Harlem, and goes through the world pretending he was born in certain place. However odd this may sound, also happens to a nation being, when it finally comes into existence, the achievement of the people who make it up. And the quality of the nation being absolutely at the mercy, defined, dictated by the nature and the quality of the people who make it up.
The only reason why people have ever come to America, no matter how they make it look or how they make it sound, is because they thought that they would have a better life here than they had wherever they were. That's why they came.
Right.
Except for the black man. We didn't come like that.
No.
But everybody else did.
Right.
I'm embarrassed to tell you and to say this, because that's why I asked you what you got growing up about African people. Because I'm embarrassed to tell you that when I think of the memories of what I learned and what I was taught, I don't think I was taught anything at home about African people, because I don't know how much my parents knew about Africans.
Right.
I didn't grow up in what you would call a black nationalist or a black conscious household. I did not. My parents certainly participated in history. They were at the March on Washington. They did what they did and were around when a lot of this happened. But I didn't grow up in that kind of Afrocentric household like many of us have. So they've been exposed to these people in this history all along. I was not. So a lot of stuff I didn't get until I was older and growing up and learning and reaching out and finding authors and work experiences. And I learned a lot more in college, of course, along the way. My point is, what I remember most about Africans is Tarzan movies, Johnny Weissmuller. Like that's...
Yeah, I was going to say the same
That's
thing.
what sticks with me. It's Tarzan and Jane. Like those movies were my ideas of Africa. So it was wild and untamed and uncivilized. And I got that from American socialization and American programming. That's the Matrix in America. That's what that Matrix looks like.
Right.
You'll grow up, and the time that I grew up, I'm 54, so I'm older than you are. But even still, those were the movies. And that's what I was seeing of Africa. And then I compare that to Cecil B. DeMille's and the Ten Commandments. So then you see Egypt, which is not necessarily being presented to you as something that's black, but it's certainly being presented to you as something that is grand. And so just contrasting that with what I was learning, I knew that I did know enough to know that Egypt was in Africa, but I certainly didn't think of Egypt the same way that I thought of Tarzan and Jane in Africa. So my programming of what Africa was Tarzan and Jane. And in addition to that, my next door neighbor, Mr. Ferguson, he was a military man, and he had a subscription to National Geographic magazine. And he kept everyone. So whenever you went over his house in the basement, they were all there. So my other ideas of Africa came from what I saw on the covers and as I flipped through the National Geographic magazines. So I knew there were tribes. I knew they had bowls in their lips. I knew the women went bare-breasted. I saw all that stuff that National Geographic was putting in there. If I ever saw any developed cities or any African business people, I never ever saw those images. If I did, they didn't stay with me.
Yeah. For me, it was not much of the Tarzan and Jane. I was thinking of that earlier because even now on YouTube, you would think that black people either didn't exist or were, as you said, uncivilized, just barely human. The way they're portrayed. And the crazy part is that Egypt is in Africa, so where would they have gotten it from except the people who migrated up from the sub-Saharan area and dispersed? Yeah, the root of things was always cut off to us.
And I'll even go this far, brother. Yeah. I'll even go this far. See what you think about this. You said, where else would they have come from unless they migrated up from some of the sub-Saharan areas in Africa and come up into Egypt?
Right.
And I think that is 100% true. I'll even go this far. Just as that migration came up from Southern Africa, I think it also came down from Asia down into the tip of Egypt across the waters too. So when they use the term Afro-Asiatic, I think there's some truth to that.
Yeah.
Because I think that migration was happening in both ways. And I think the spirituality of Egypt is that it was these two lands, that migration from the south up to the north and that migration from the north down to the south, these two lands that had to be reconciled in Egypt. There's a lot of spirituality that would take us off into a whole other conversation. But my point is that I'll even go as far as to say that, yeah, there were some influences from above. So that doesn't make the people, when they meet, that doesn't make the people, I don't have the human language to say this other than the way that it would resonate with us today. That don't make the people all black. It does make them a mix. So you got to look at, I always got to look at what point in history am I talking about? And one thing I learned from a brother named Ivan Van Sertima, a scholar, a brother who's now passed on to the ancestors, but he always said in his studies and in his scholarly presentations, the farther back you go in history, the blacker it gets. And I think he is right on the money with that. Just keep going back. Just keep going. Keep going.
Yeah.
So if you want to stop at 325 when you have Cleopatra and, the Roman and the Greek influences on Egypt, yeah, we can talk about that. They probably did look a lot more like Elizabeth Taylor than they look like, my mother or your mother, right? But keep going back 2,000 years in Egypt. Go back 3,000 years. Go back 10,000. They are as black as they can get. So it depends on how far back you want to go. I can talk about Egypt all day long. I love it. There's so much that they left us to ponder, you know what I'm saying? But one of the things that I recognize from all of that being said about Egypt and the North and the South coming together is that it's about filters. I've learned as an American black man, it's about filters and the filters that I allow to come into my life. And we can see that in the world today. Most of us, many of us are so divided, Brother Gregory, because we just listen to the stuff that confirms our opinion and our orientation on the world, whatever that is. So we silo, as they call it, you know what I'm saying, in that world that supports everything that we already believe in. Even on my spirituality search, brother, I always said, I started on the pew of the Christian church. And when I went on this spiritual journey, I said, you know what, God, you might lead me right back to this pew, but I'm going to go on this journey. You may never lead me back here. I may never come into another church again. And it might lead me right back to the same seat. But I'm going to go on this journey wherever you take me in my consciousness, you know?
Yeah. I can't even imagine if I went to Catholic school for 12 years, if I had never picked up the Tao Te Ching and read it, or any other book of understanding, I would just be a different person emotionally because I would be confined to that Catholic doctrine. I don't know if we had met yet. I was leaving the shoot. It was Yonla Fix My Life. So we were leaving, and I was riding with Chris Condor. And there's a sign on a church, because we were leaving that house that we used to film at up north in Chicago. And there was a church, and it said, Jesus died for you. And I thought, I understand what that means. I understand the symbol of sacrifice and all. And I just thought, that's a pretty heavy thing to lay on a 7 or 8 year old.
Right.
Like a responsibility. Like, I was tortured and murdered for you. I just remember as we were leaving, seeing that sign with him, and I was like, wow, that's a heavy thing to lay on somebody. And so if you don't ever step out of that and perhaps see it as not only for the connotation but the denotation, you would be confused, and spiritually your spirit may not be free because it would feel constrained by a limited understanding of what it means to have a spirit and to have an inner relationship with the power, with God.
Yep. That's so well said, brother, because that is very, very well said. That point when you say those who don't ever step out of that doctrine, that way of being, whatever the denomination, you didn't use these words, but whatever denomination it is that tradition, probably a better word, they've come up in, whatever that is. If you never step out of that programming and that, I would even go this far, whatever religion you are, it is an indoctrination until you come to a place of what I would term a spiritual awakening, which is what you talked about. That point where you step out, was your words, of the programming that you've been raised up into. Like, that's an awakening. Not everybody does that. Some people never leave, and we can see that with the Palestinians and the Israelis. Some people are never going to leave their programming. It's what it is, and it's what it's always going to be. We don't even have to go that far. We can look in our own communities and our own families and see that, right? Those of us who do step out, as you say, have an awakening, as I say, that leads you to a whole other level and other way of being. That I hate to put it like this, or I hesitate to put it like this. It begins to, or it could begin to, separate you from those around you, even those closest to you, because they're still in the program, okay? They're still in the program. So you've been awakened and lifted out of that, and then you realize, oh my God, that was a program. Oh my God, they're in the program. Right. Oh my God, I'm not in the program. So that's an awakening. So just integrating that alone takes some time.
Imagine how much went into programming you. So the awakening of it is going to take it's going to be a process as well.
Yes.
And that's difficult. Part of it, I think, what would make it difficult is the clinging, the holding on to things that are familiar and then changing. Because then that means you're going to have to be different from other people, and it makes you stand out. And sometimes that is uncomfortable, I think, for a lot of folks. So they sort of don't want to change or take on any new information and admit, hey, maybe I was wrong. And then I'd have to admit all these other decisions I made based on that perhaps weren't right. And that's a tough thing for people and me sometimes to go, ooh, wow.
And men in general.
I look back on
that's
that.
part of our social program.
Right.
You know, not necessarily to admit when you're wrong or need help or, you know, that's not being a man. That's an old school, traditional social program that many of us, our fathers, our fathers' fathers, our fathers' fathers' fathers, was their way of being. You know, they would probably, if you think about your father's father, let's just go that far, your grandfather, all of them, on your father's side and your grandfather's on your mother's side, right? Whether you know them or not, but just think of them.
Yeah.
They would look at our newscast today. I think of those gentlemen. I think of the ones on my side, just my grandfathers, so my parents' fathers, right? They would look at some of this world today about transsexuals and genderless society and your pronouns. People ask you, what are your pronouns? And they would look at us like they would be stupefied. Like that's so not the world that they knew and grew up in.
Right. No, right. Absolutely. They would be not understanding. It was very simple and black and white binary for them.
Yes.
My grandmother would always tell me the story of my grandfather's brothers. And at his funeral, and he was married, and at his funeral, a lot of men showed up. And they had, their hair was pressed and they had on fur coats and stuff. So it occurred to people at that moment that he had a secret life, that people didn't back then weren't free to be who they were.
Mm-hmm.
And so he had lived up until this time of his death, and people finally, you get at the funeral, go, oh, he was a different person.
Mm-hmm.
We didn't even really know who he was, and he had to conceal that.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, they come from a totally different generation.
Totally different generation. And yet, this is what I've been thinking. I want to hear what you think on this. And yet, when I'm watching the events of, let's say, recently, January 6th events, when I'm watching that, as a black man with a level of consciousness in America, I know what I'm looking at. I know the spirit of the people that is on them and in them as they do what they do. That is the same spirit, even though I wasn't here, that 200 years ago, white folks had burning crosses, you know, night riding, raiding people, where we were in terror in the woods, fleeing oppression and persecution in the night.
The Ku Klux Klan originated in the wake of the nation's greatest trauma, the Civil War. In 1865, decommissioned Confederate officers in Pulaski, Tennessee, formed a fraternal social club. They called themselves the Ku Klux Klan, from the Greek word for circle, kuklos.
It was essentially a club where they were going to pull pranks. They started to dress up in very elaborate costumes and go out and try to terrorize freed slaves. They would pose as Confederate officers come back from the dead. The reality is that the Klan of Reconstruction spent its time murdering people, throwing people off bridges, hanging them from trees.
When the federal government clamped down in 1871, the Klan dissolved and lay dormant for decades. The birth of a nation sparked a revival of the Ku Klux Klan in the 1920s. The Klan's ideology of white supremacy and what they called 100% Americanism resonated across the country. In 1925, 50,000 Klansmen and women gathered in Washington in a vivid display of their numbers. 4 million Americans claimed Klan membership. By the 1930s, bad press and power struggles had ripped apart the once powerful Klan. But not for long. In March 1965, a white housewife, mother, and civil rights worker named Viola Liuzzo was gunned down by Alabama Klansmen. The brazen murder pushed the federal government into a full-scale assault on the Ku Klux Klan. In October 1965, the House Un-American Activities Committee, known for its probes into communist and civil rights groups, opened hearings on the Klan. Building on FBI intelligence, HUAC investigators developed a strategy to follow the money and held well-publicized hearings on Capitol Hill. Embarrassed by HUAC revelations that North Carolina had the largest Klan organization in the nation, state officials cracked down. By then, the North Carolina Klan had dwindled to a fraction of its former size. On September 15th, fellow Klansmen stapled their membership cards to a giant cross and ceremoniously set it ablaze.
African Americans are organized, and they're just not going to take this from the Ku Klux Klan anymore. A lot of whites are finding their racial anxieties channeled into other political avenues, into the Republican Party. And so for all those reasons, the Klan, it becomes a shameful thing again.
It's the same spirit. See, the people come and go. We only get 80, 90, 100 years. But the spirits live on. It's the same spirit that breached the Capitol. It's the same spirit, brother.
Absolutely. Absolutely, yeah. My parents and all the folks I know in their generation, that's what they were feeling. That 50s creeping back in.
Exactly.
Like, oh, this reminds us of the 1950s.
Exactly.
So, yeah, that's very true. Yeah, the spirit, the energy is all there.
It's there.
It's the same.
It cycles.
Ruby Bridges is walking to school.
Exactly. Mm-hmm. It cycles itself. And it's so, not to get, too esoteric, as they would say, but you just look at that. God has shows us so much. You just look at the seasons. It's just 4 seasons. They cycle over and over again. They cycle over. So that tells you that life is circular. These spirits live in these cycles. We only get X amount of years, but they here over and over and over doing the same thing, working out whatever they're working out, cosmically or whatever. Right. So it's very, very interesting. You mentioned earlier when we met, and I can take it back to, I sent you some pictures of August 15th, 2013. I sent you some pictures of that day. And I'm looking at this and I see this is the first time I met this brother on this shoot. What do you see when you look at these pictures? Like, who is that Gregory Brian Cooke? Who was that man that day?
I look at the pictures and I'm looking at them now. I remember feeling good about what I was doing, the work, like being part of that. Mm-hmm. And that had been important to me, to be a part of something that I felt good about doing. It wasn't just a job. Mm-hmm. So even when I was tired, working on Yanla, Fix My Life, is different. There are times when I work on jobs and I get to a point and I'm frustrated and I'm mad at people because I'm there, because I'm not particularly happy about the work that I'm doing. Mm-hmm. It doesn't mean anything to me. I'm like, this is just for money. I don't even care. I don't even want to, why am I here? Just those voices that go on in my head when I'm starting to run out of patience because I'm fatigued. Mm-hmm. But that, I didn't have that. And as I look, I feel contented. I can look at my face, and one of the photos I'm smiling, and the other he was at ease. Mm-hmm, if I look at the person that's in those photos. So, yeah.
You were remarkable to me because I'm working with this production. Harpo Productions was doing Yanla Fix My Life at that time in Chicago as an internal production of Harpo Studios for the emerging OWN network. Right? This was their second season. Yanla had done a series of shows before then. I was consulting by phone. The second season, where I met you that day, was the first season that I was there on location as we shot it, right? So it was remarkable to me having met the Harpo folks. So it was remarkable to me to meet a brother. Like, so when I saw you, I was like, whoa, okay, so that's, make note of that. So here I am, click, making note of that. That was what was remarkable for me, that you were there. And I was very happy to see you there and made a note in my mind to be very supportive of anything that I could do to make the experience good for you and for me, for both of us. Because there was a lot of unknown for me at that point with this crowd of people. What I knew about them is that these are holdovers, many of these people, in my perception and what I was told, of the Oprah Winfrey show infrastructure. So,
that's correct.
Right. That day that we met, how did you come to work with Harpo Productions at that time?
I had been working on the Oprah Winfrey show for a few years before, of course, when it ended in 2011. Mm-hmm. I was walking down the hallway at Harpo, and one of the production managers, Lisa, she called my name and said, hey, would you be interested in working on this show? And she told me about it and the title. I was like, oh, Yeah, for sure. Yeah, absolutely. So it was just that sort of cosmic alignment.
Yes.
Being in a place and someone sees you and the light bulb goes off over their head. And yeah, it was just that simple. And I'm glad that happened. So I came to work at Harpo Studios, though, because I was living in Los Angeles, and I came back to Chicago to do a film. And the financing for that film that I came back to do fell apart. And so I had to decide whether or not to go back to Los Angeles. And so I started working at Harpo. I was logging tapes there. And I just needed a job because most of my days, the only thing I thought about was writing. I would work and then I would write. And I had been there and I was like, well, am I going to go back to Los Angeles? Or I've been there for a few months and I got a job there shooting some behind the scenes footage of Bring Your Kids to Work Day. And I was assigned to follow Reggie Wells, who was Oprah's makeup artist for about 20 years or so. And I met him and we were talking after all of that was done. And I said, well, I don't know if I should go back or what I should do. And he said, well, whoever you need to meet in Los Angeles, because that's why I was there to meet people, just industry. He said, you're not going to meet anybody who's higher than the highest person who's here and all of the people you're going to meet here. And when he said it, sometimes you hear things and it makes sense to you. And it made sense to me that I was in a place of opportunity, and I'm thinking about going somewhere else instead of realizing perhaps I've been planted in very fertile soil.
Nice.
And perhaps I'm where I need to be. So look at it as an opportunity and take advantage of it, appreciate it. So yeah, that's how it came to be for me and how I ended up staying in Chicago and ending up on Beyond to Fix My Life. I remember when I first met her, I think it was in a conference room in Harpo Studios, and that she was exactly who she was. She reminded me of my aunt and my mom, and it wasn't a put on. You know what I mean? I met folks, and when the camera goes off, then everything drops away, and they're a whole different person. But that wasn't her. So that was really one of the first things I remember. And she addressed me, and she would call me like Mr. Greg. And so one of the things, and I know I mentioned this to you before, was the environment was essentially, it was predominantly, Harpo was predominantly white, and was in Chicago. And the show itself, even the people who were the executives. So you all treated me, you extended the way you talked to me as a person. To me, when you do that to people, you give them some agency. And so other people have to take your lead in how they talk to you and they treat you.
Right.
And I was glad to be there because of that, and the experience, and that you did that. You know, you would talk to me. And I recall, we would just in between takes talk about things, and you were thoughtful and recognizing that you were a work in progress. So, and it just was, again, just a grounded in a sense. That's really why I enjoyed being there. You were grounded. Iyanla was grounded. You got it.
I remember specifically making note of you because of all the things you just talked about and the infrastructure there. But also you had and the energy of what I got from you immediately was like, this is a solid brother who has a lot of quiet strength. Like that's what there was a solidness to you. There was a solidness to Brother Keith on the camera.
Yeah.
There was a solidness to him, and I could feel that from the brother, and I felt that from you. So there was a soul that I was becoming familiar with in Chicago, and that's a lot of what you heard from me to you. And it was something that I was beginning to feel in the air there, because we did several shows from there, because I have other pictures of us doing the Arias family. Do you remember that? This was the Puerto Rican family that we did, and it was snow on the ground, it was ice on the ground.
Oh, yeah.
Yep, remember that? We went into their house.
Yeah.
Remember that?
I remember that, and I remember being legitimately concerned about the son.
He was volatile. Remember, he punched the hole through the wall and all of that. Remember that?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I remember. I recall really being concerned that he would act out.
Yep.
In some way, violently. That was a legit concern for me at that point. When you arrived, and when I dealt with Iyanla, it felt like I was treated as someone who is another person, who they talk to as a person. And I felt sometimes I was talked to as someone who was hired to do a job. Kind of like I don't know if subject is the right word, but it just wasn't the same type of interaction where you're dealing with someone who's capable and thoughtful and knowledgeable and who knows what they're doing, and not an underling who you just kind of have to maybe talk at or down to in some direction.
I totally understand.
So yeah,
I totally understand what you're saying.
Right. And so there was some of that, and it was really good to be involved when you arrived and were I guess I say normal person, just like I'm a brother,
Right. And let me tell you, when I first got a whiff of that, when I first got a whiff of what you're talking about is when we were in San Antonio and we were shooting this story called These Two Sisters, the Hudson Sisters. We were in San Antonio, Texas, and at the end of that shoot, brother, one of the guys in the crew, he stopped me because I guess we were saying goodbye to each other or whatever. And he stopped me and he said, I just want to say, brother, and I think he probably was a Latino brother. He said, I just want to say thank you for talking to me and treating me like a person, like a human being.
Absolutely.
And I thought, and it just struck me when he said it, like it would never cross my mind not to. And then it struck me, oh, wow, he works in a world. All this happens in the blink of an eye, right? This level of understanding. It all happens in the blink of an eye. Oh, wow, he works in a world where people don't even acknowledge his presence.
Right.
That's what his days look like.
Yeah.
So the moments that we had spent together, what he was stopping me to say was, thank you for talking to me, for asking about, I'm ad-libbing now, for asking about my daughter and my dog, that I had an accident on the way to work. Thank you for actually talking to me about it, or hearing what I think and feel about it.
Right. Connected.
Yeah. That's when I got that.
You are definitely connected.
Yeah, and so that's the first hint I got of what you're saying. And then the other part of what I hear you're saying, that's another level of awakening when you realize after all the years that you've spent in television, that I've spent in television, or doing whatever work we have done in our lives, when it becomes clear to you in the moment, at whatever moment that is for you, that I'm a part of something that's important, that what we're doing here together is important. Like this, you can feel it. I hear you talking about that. Like you can feel it in your blood that this work, you might not be able to describe it. You might not even be processing it that way, but you can feel in the energy of the work that you're doing that this matters, as opposed to me standing in a field in Pennsylvania as an executive at Discovery Channel, overseeing a program that takes giant trebuchets and slingshots objects across the field to see how far you can throw objects. Like that don't satisfy my soul. Like I'm standing there being responsible for this shit. That's when you know you gotta go. Like you can do the work, but there's nothing attached to what you're doing. Right. You're just making sausage and packaging it. So when you have a moment on this kind of series where you have an awakening and awareness that, oh wow, we're doing something that matters. So by the time that we met, I was aware that I'm part of a group of people doing something that matters. What we're doing is important. Because being in those moments, man, I remember one moment, I think it was that Shannon Wiley story, where I looked up in this small room we were shooting in, Brother Keith was crying, I was crying, all the camera people were crying. It was just like, it became, those moments let you know that you are a part of God's work. You just want to be good at it. You just want to do it well.
Right. I was watching the clip where Shannon's father hugged him this morning. I was watching that, and I remember you can't help but to feel that. There were multiple times on set or on location where I would become emotional. And as I think about it now, I'm feeling that this is people's lives, and this is the point where they are changing, where they're dealing with things that have been their undoing, and we've come together to make it better, to be a source of hope.
When we worked together in 2014, so a year after we met, and we came back and we did a whole series of shows in Chicago where we had that house like you talked about earlier. And so I was driving, I had driven my black Tahoe all the way from Washington. So I had a car full of, remember that? I would drive everywhere, right? No planes for me. I took a few planes with people, but mostly if it was within reason, I would drive it myself. So I'm pulling up every day with my black Tahoe, and it's full of shit everywhere, pillows, everything, so I'm trying to get it in some kind of order. And I always remember seeing you walking from the end of the street, like just coming, like you had either gotten off the subway line or you had just lived around the corner. I didn't know. I just remember seeing you walking, and you would be walking, and you always had that look on your face, very serene. You know, this is all me making it up in my mind, right? I don't know if any of this was true. You could have been, you know, been chaotic and haphazard and full of panic. I don't know. But when I would see you walking, and I'm straightening up my car and trying to just get it, you know, locked down or whatever, and I would see you walking up the street, and you would just have that serene look on your face, and it was always very tranquil and strong and yet even. I thought, wow, okay. That's the effect of that I always took from your presence.
The calming part, the seas are stable, and they may be deep, but they're stable. I've heard that.
Because if you look at that picture that I sent you this morning with you off in the corner in the gray t-shirt, and you're looking over, like I captured you right when the scene was going. If you zoom in on your face and just look at you, like it's that look. Like and again, I'm making this up in my mind, but I would always see, what I saw through the lens in that moment was you either thinking of the story I was writing was you're identifying. Your soul is being fed by what you're looking at. And you were deep in some space. There were a couple of levels on which you were processing what you were seeing. That's the look that you always had, like you were always doing that kind of math or calculus or balance in your head. And it always remained even keeled. That's what I didn't see you have like hot, and maybe you had them. Again, I'm making this shit up. You tell me if I'm pushed back. I didn't see you have any flare-ups or blow-ups. Like probably same with me. I've been described as many ways of being very difficult to work with. And I know what I want to see vision-wise, and that's important to me. That we execute that as best we can. So I would always experience you as sort of, well, you tell me, how were you experiencing yourself at that time?
I mentioned courage, and I would like to say something else about that. Finding courage in the leaders and in you who will become leaders. Courage is the most important of all the virtues, because without courage, you can't practice any other virtue consistently. You see? You can't be consistently kind or fair or humane or generous. Not without courage, because if you don't have it, sooner or later you'll stop and say, the threat is too much, the difficulty is too high, the challenge is too great.
When I did my very first Apocalypse, the first day of shooting, there was someone on set. He had only been involved in the film the day of, right? But he spent the day, every time there was a setup, going, well, we should do this, we should do this. But I've already done it. I've already done the planning. I've already done everything, so we don't need to make any new plans. Like, we don't need to go find another new location. We have a location.
It's not time for another vision. We got a vision. Let's execute this vision. Right.
Exactly. And if you have prepared for something, then you, and this is for everything in life for me, I guess, is if I prepared for something, then the best thing for me to do is to trust my preparation and execute that. But the thing was, I could have stopped what I was doing many times during the day and turned my attention to him and sort of changed the energy and the place I was, the zone, and gone, look, bruh, you need to be quiet because you're distracting me every time you talk. You're in the way. But what I chose to do was to acknowledge what he said and then go back to what I was doing and stay focused. And to the point where you can't do that in life, where you just have to deal with somebody, because people will take you out of your peace and have you in their confusion and chaos and their desires for what they want.
Right.
But you know what I'm saying?
I do. Like, I want to know when the last time, honestly, whether you want to talk about it or not, if you recall the last time when you just lost your fucking mind. Like, you just came out of your character and said some shit that you were like, you know what? That was just really foul, what I said and what I did. Right. And you know what I mean?
Yeah. I'm trying to think, because I got into a place where I say things to friends, so I don't have to say it to the other people in that way.
Right. You can't recall it off the top of your head, right?
It's not anything recent.
Okay.
There's nothing in
the
last
good. Me either.
10 years that I had to
do
that. Yeah, I think
me either.
It should. Yeah, I think that's something that everybody should, as they get older, learn how to manage. And I know because my aunt told me this years ago. Well, of course, the part about between stimulus and response is the power of life. Is a lot where the power lies. But then she was always said, once you respond in anger, they got you. They got you. So because I didn't respond to that person in anger who was on set because he was distracting me, now just how I can respond to him now is seen and perceived and I have the power.
Yeah,
I
no
have
doubt.
the power. Instead of getting into an argument about somebody in that moment, now, for me at least, I have the peace of how I dealt with it, and that now I can respond to it in a way that's really constructive, as opposed to, bro, you distracted me, when what I came to understand was, after I reflected on it, was, so you know what? You have what you think is appropriate, and I think is appropriate is different. We have different set of boundaries. So we know that that's not going to work. For me, it's not going to work to be around you because, and I'm going to jump back. The last time I remember, and I didn't necessarily do anything, but that my peace was disturbed. It
Right.
was really not kind of a heavy thing.
Right.
Was I had a cousin. He was murdered in 2017.
Mm-hmm.
And I tell you, I spent about 3 months,
Mm-hmm.
and I was ready to like go nuclear on people
Right.
walking down the street.
Right.
Like, it was really at a place where I was spent way too many hours thinking about, man, how could I kill somebody and make it look like I didn't kill somebody? And I know it's an awful thing. It was very dark.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it was like really dark. I'm thinking in my mind how to take someone's life and get away with it because I'm that angry. I'm so out of my place. And
what was going on with the case at that time?
Oh, they had suspects,
Uh-huh.
but they couldn't prove it.
Okay.
So the police are talking to people, but I'll tell you what happened.
Mm-hmm.
So a few months into it, one of the people who was accused,
Mm-hmm.
they found him and he was dead, and it was ruled a suicide.
Wow.
And the thing, it didn't make me feel better. It didn't make me feel better.
Right.
And I realized it. I realized that that person who had done that to my cousin, what he had given me was his lack of peace.
Right.
And so for me to perpetuate that lack of peace
Mm-hmm.
was for that person to win,
Mm-hmm.
for that energy that he was sharing to win. And I had to let that go.
Yeah.
I had to forgive him.
Right.
I had to let that go. I had to forgive, because that's, because that wasn't going to work. That wasn't going to be, I couldn't live like that. So,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
yeah. So that was the last time.
That's a tough one.
It boiled over for me.
Yeah. And when you think about that now, like, do you think there's somewhere in all of that, there's something that made you a better person having gone through that moment?
Definitely. It did. It taught me to practice the thing. In 2015, I shot a documentary about a guy who was a truant officer.
Mm-hmm.
That I known him for a long time. Over in Inglewood community, here in Inglewood, tough.
Mm-hmm.
It's a rough place. One of the things he was telling me was, all these kids that you see who are, court involved in committing these crimes, they've all been abused and neglected and traumatized.
Mm-hmm. There's that word again, trauma.
Right. All of these things that they're doing is acting out on that.
Mm-hmm.
And what he essentially was trying to say, because people, you got to be tough on crime and stuff, but that's not, you have to be smart on it. These are people who need help. And if we can stop before they get to that place where they're doing these awful things, then that's what we need to be focused on, not locking people up.
Mm-hmm.
And I had to reflect on what he said because I wanted to tell his story so other people could understand that. But here I was in 2017 ready to shoot up the world because I could not understand. I understood on an intellectual level, but not an emotional level, that hurt people. Apple seeds give you apples, and apples give you apple seeds. I was made a better person because emotionally I came to an understanding that to react in that lack of peace and disturbance with more lack of peace and more lack of disturbance is not the answer.
Mm-hmm.
And like I said earlier, it's one thing to talk about the bulls, but to be in the bull ring is another.
It's so true. Well, you mentioned that at one time you went to Los Angeles and you lived there for a while, and then you came back to Chicago to make a film, and then you mentioned making several other films with several different people. How do you see yourself primarily artistically, as a filmmaker, as a storyteller, as a documentarian, as a producer, as a writer? How do you self-conceptualize?
I would refer to myself as a filmmaker.
Okay.
And that person is a storyteller.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes it may take on the role of a producer or a director or editor. You're telling the story. And so, yeah, the filmmaker storyteller is how I would see myself.
Mm-hmm. And what stories do you see yourself wanting to tell at this point in your filmmaking career?
Well, there's three, but there's some themes that are really the next three projects I really want to do. One is this project called Fear of the Unknown. I had this idea about telling a love story, but then I really didn't understand what that meant. And it wasn't until my grandfather, he had a stroke in 2001. And so from May 2001 until October, every day my grandmother would go to the hospital where he was and be with him. And it was tough for me because this person who had helped me and made my life possible came and got my car out of being towed at midnight and just gave his life to me and everybody I loved. I couldn't do anything to help him. So it was tough to see that every day, but my grandmother was there. And it helped me find a definition for courage, and it was emotional courage. And that was the willingness and ability to display all of your human emotions. They say it's on display when people are terminally ill or handicapped, or for the people who are caring for them. And that the true test of it is to fight the fight you cannot win. So in order to really what love is the practice of courage. And so it's the practice of courage required to choose love over fear in life. Because ultimately, everything that you love, every person, they're going to leave you or you're going to leave them. So you're fighting this fight that you cannot win. And that's, I think, it's important that we take that, because in life, you look around and the problems are so big. And so people just don't want to fight. They don't want to have that courage, the energy to fight, because it looks hopeless. But the true test of it, of life and courage, is to fight that fight even if you can't win. You won't ever sit under the shade of that tree. And so that story is about this epic, romantic, supernatural, dark comedy. And it's about what would you do if you were not afraid? That's the question. So there's that. There's another story about breaking cycles that keep us broken. It's about a brother I met when I was doing a music video. I was a production manager, and I knew his story a little bit, but he had been an artist, a musical artist, and a rapper in the late 80s, early 90s, been on MTV. He was from Lansing, Michigan. But his father was a well-established drug dealer. And so there was an entire life that came with that. And so at one point, as his career would start going well, he started having some money problems. He had a child on the way, and he himself got into what essentially was the family business, got a phone number from somebody, and it led him to a connection to become a distributor for Pablo Escobar. So that's the game. You know what I mean? So it's not a small-time thing at that point. So, of course, that doesn't last long. And Pablo Escobar gets killed. Everybody starts telling on each other, and he finds himself in the jail cell with his father. And for the first time, he sees him differently. His father looks very small to him. And he's like, I have to get out of here. I mean, not just this jail cell, but from this curse, this generational curse I've inherited. This has got to go. So him figuring out how to do that and going through that process and that whole story, when he told me that, I said, I want to tell that story. Because there are a lot of people out there that are dealing with things they inherited from parents that were present or not present.
That's part of the human, if I can just say on that story, that's part of the human story. It's like you are past the baton of genes and patterns and pathologies that come with your blood and in your family and in your culture and the time that you live. You're past that baton, and it's like you just run your race, and you run it for as long and as strong as you can until the day when you can't and don't and won't run it anymore. And you hope that that time meant something to somebody, and 9 times out of 10 it does. It meant something to someone. It does, and it did, and it always will, and so that along the way as well, but you just like to think that all of that meant something when it all comes down to it, and it does. You can't live and not touch somebody. Everybody touched somebody.
Right. Absolutely.
when you talk about the projects that you have now and wanting to tell those stories, and I think you probably had another one that you want to talk about, but do you see the seeds of that storyteller that were planted in your youth as a child, in any of your behavior, in the way that you were raised? Where did that storyteller come from in your bloodline and experience?
That's a really good question, because I don't know. There's really no other. I have a cousin who's an actor, my first cousin. But other than that, there's no creative folks in my family. It took me a long time to embrace that. That's what my gifts lied in there, to be able to tell a story. So I don't know where that came from, but I knew the day that I had the first inkling of it that led me to this journey. I was watching a basketball game, and at the end of it, I saw the credits, and I saw that I said a cameraman, and that was a job. And you're telling the story of this game, and it's there's in the beginning, and it's 0-0, and then there are all of these acts committed by all of these people, and then time expires, and there's going to be a hero and a winner. And so it occurred to me that that's what was happening, and I thought, man, I'd like to be a part of that. And then also that realizing the places I would go, like working with you, the people that we met, like I would have never met those people if not for the show. I would have never gone to those places. So it afforded those opportunities. It was a long, revealing process. And I had been working in commercials and music videos for about 8 years before I finally started writing, and had the courage to write down an idea and then to stay with it and follow it. I don't know, as a youth, I remember doing a comic book about a ninja. And I created the character and the story, and I wish I still had that book. It was written on this pink construction paper, I recall it. But yeah, it wasn't until I got to be an adult and I started to take my life into my hands, and not reacting to the expectations so much of family and what other people are doing. Are they going to graduate school? Are they lawyers? Are they kind of, is that pressure to live up to what others who come before you have done? So. And
at that point, Gregory, did you see yourself as an artist? At that point in your life, when you were making those decisions?
No, honestly, it wasn't until I was in my late 30s that I considered myself an artist. I really realized that I brought things from my imagination that nobody else could see, and then share it with the world. It's like a gift. It's a thing. For me, I had to remind myself not to take things for granted, because it just is. Like if you run really fast, then you don't know that you're running fast. I say the speed of light only knows, it's like, I'm just the speed of light. But to go, oh no, this is a gift and other people don't have it. So when I had stopped doing commercials for a while, and I had, worked at Harpo, and then when that was over and I got out, I got out of Harpo like I was in jail. But and I wasn't there any longer. And I started doing freelance work, and so I'm working on these crews, and there were no black directors. There were no black producers of these commercials and these music videos. And it occurred to me, and I felt bad that I had been a director and a producer, and that I had the chance for other people to see me doing it. And I took it for granted that people would see me and think it's possible. I was like, oh my God, I was just taking that for granted that people would see me and go, I can do that too now. It's been a process, and to not take stuff for granted, I'm learning that every day.
When I look at that picture, brother, of you and I in Ferguson, out there at the site of Mike Brown's execution, I look at that picture and know that we knew that we were part of something that was important, that we were doing God's work at that time. We were witnesses to something. We knew that. That whole experience of being out there that night with the National Guard. Remember walking past the Guard and the tanks and remember that night of that long walk, and that was
I left before they released me, just before, and I went back to the hotel the rest of the night, because I was there up just until it got dark. And once I think it's 7 o'clock, and then you all were out there for later. But I remember being in that parking lot.
Oh, so you were in the parking lot though, right?
Yeah, I was in the parking lot, right?
Okay. Because did you see Yanla ask, "Where's her son? Where's her son?" Did you see that whole thing?
No, I don't.
Okay,
think
so
I saw
you.
That.
The National Guard just came in today. They just came in today. It was first it was St. Louis County Police Department. They let me come in. I came and went as I pleased. I even took them food, took them water. The church supplied it. And then the State Highway Patrol came in. And then now the government has ordered for this If you think that's bad, wait till you get a little bit further down and you see the tanks that are behind. Well, I don't know if they're behind, but the tanks are behind this shopping center.
I don't see my stuff. I don't see Deborah. I don't see Chinaza. I don't see Laura. Where are they? I don't see my son. Where's Damon? Where's
Damon came in a red car. He went in to get the 7.
I have a tough question for you. When we were in Davidson, we had to pat them down, and you said this treatment is a result of your bad behavior.
Yeah.
Is this akin to that in any kind of way? Are those tanks a result of the bad behavior that has gone on in this community?
I don't think that the tanks are the result of the bad behavior of the people in this community. I think the tanks are the result of the bad behavior in society that has reduced people to their behavior and limited their expectation that people can change that behavior or be different. I don't think this is overkill in this. People are grieving. People are sad. People are angry. People are hurt. And this country's response, the state, the city, I don't know who, I just want to hold everybody accountable. The response to anger and sadness and grief and a little bit of wilding out is the National Guard and tanks in the United States of America. I don't understand. And forgive me, that everyone searching is not of color, and the people being searched are people of color. I got a problem.
All right, let's roll on here.
So how do you think our young men feel?
Right.
When they see this?
Right.
When they see the tanks and they're greeted with M16 rifles, and yet you can't come and talk to me like a decent individual. Your security guys jumped out of the car and they were locked and loaded on your security guys and saying, hey, what are you doing? You moved too fast.
Right.
Now, they were a little hesitant towards them. Mike Brown didn't get that option.
It takes a lot for a man to restrain himself under these kind of conditions.
Under these kind of conditions.
It really does. It really does.
Because I feel like I'm treated as an animal.
It does.
I literally feel like I'm in a cage
exactly.
when you treat me like this.
I get it, bro. I get it.
I'm not moving till somebody tell me where my son is. Because he is an
Where's Damon?
African American.
He's in another car. He's on his way. He isn't here yet.
Feedback and reaction from the chat.
But they came all the way up because when they saw more cars coming in, that's why they came all the way up.
So where are they usually?
Right down here.
Okay.
In the command center. They used the command post right down there. I mean, I've been able to walk just from the church to come up here to the command post without ever being stopped during the daytime and at nighttime. But now, as you see, we were greeted by tanks.
Wow.
The first night of the riots, my lieutenant in my area called me and said, Pastor, you need to get down here ASAP. I said, what's going on? He said, they're rioting and they're looting. I brought my wife with me because I knew she wouldn't believe me. When I get here, I'm literally, where you're standing at would be the protesters. Where this truck is at would be the police officers. I had dogs right by my legs, growling and trying to gnaw at my legs because I'm standing in between both of them. I didn't know what to do, and I felt like a referee, and the only thing I could say was, let's pray.
Well, let's pray. You can have an operational plan that can have a little more compassion by at least having some people of color doing this.
I know.
Honestly. You understand what I'm saying? You can do your operational plan, but have some people of color here that would at least help with that.
But why do we have
that
uniformed military personnel corralling the citizenry that has a deep emotional wound in this
moment? Now one of the answers might be is because some of the citizenry has been creating violence. That's what you were talking about in there. have been throwing things through windows and looting and creating violence. This is the response to violence.
You know what? Because when you teach a student in your public schools, A squared plus B squared equals C squared, and don't teach them that you're valuable. When you teach a distorted history of people of color and Native Americans and Latin Americans, when you don't teach about who these people are from the inside out, they will know they will loot. And they will dishonor themselves because you've taught them they're not valuable and worthy. You teach them Christopher Columbus and you don't teach them Emmett Till. Yes, they loot because they don't understand what it means to come from a village where your grandmother and your great-grandmother have a history and a culture and a tradition that matters to you. They don't teach them properly. And then when they grow and they behave improperly, you think it's them and they've been educated in your system. The same system that sends the National Guard to corral them at night is the one that taught them a distorted history and perspective of who they were as a people. Yes, they riot.
Yes, I understand.
They're not just rioting because Michael Brown was shot. They're rioting because their grandmother scrubbed toilets and didn't get paid.
Right, that's right. Understood.
I had a little guy tell me this yesterday. It's very interesting. He said, Christopher Columbus steals a whole country and get a national holiday. Mike Brown steals cigarillos and he gets murdered.
They didn't know he had the cigarillos when he got shot, though.
You're absolutely correct. You're absolutely correct.
Damon's meeting us at Ferguson Market.
What is that?
That's where we're meeting.
So you were at the meeting when Iyanla met with the community activists and the gang members. You were there.
At the church, that's right.
Yep.
Would he be willing to ask the community to stand down, hold the peace for 14 days? And he said he would. Okay. And Chief Jackson agreed that if for whatever reason it's not going to happen in 14 days, that he would come back to the community leaders and let them know, and we would do whatever is next. But the question is, who are the leaders?
Right.
You know, because he was saying that he spoke to the leaders, but the people who were sitting in front of me tonight, most of whom were from St. Louis, nobody except all the people from Ferguson. So we're asking for a 14-day peace process. Hold the peace for 14 days while leaders like you do that organizing thing. So we're going to be at Ground Zero where he got shot tomorrow at 3 o'clock. Would you be willing to come?
I am. I have a precaution about the 14 days. I've like when General Holder was here, one of the things that he came back and said, listen, a grand jury investigation is not swift. A murder investigation, because one of the things I'm going to ask the brothers tonight who's asking for swift justice, have you ever seen somebody involved in a murder case and it was done in a week, done in two weeks and 14 days?
I've seen it done in 90 days with a black man is involved.
Yeah, but there's a big difference between 14 days and 90 days when everything they've promised us, because what happens is they've promised us in 2 days this is going to happen and it don't happen. In 3 days it's going to happen, it don't happen. And if I go before the people that trust me and say, hey, give me 14 days.
We're asking for 14 days of peace. That's
For-
what we're asking for.
Right.
While the process unfolds, are we not
And we're
promising
not-
what
okay.
that promise
Okay,
that
okay,
process
that's
is?
what I was cautious
We're
of.
asking
What
for
are
14 days of peace. Right now, we can't say anything. We can't say the grand jury did this. We can't say they're investing. We can't say anything. And we're fighting every night. What are they going to do? I don't want these babies up against the National Guard
That's right.
every freaking night.
That's right, Iyanla.
We got to hold. We got to do something.
That's right.
Can they just stand down and hold the peace for 14 days while you're organizing and the community's organizing? We got some clear asks from community leaders. The 4 school boards coming together. We got to do something. Does that make sense?
It makes sense. And I've been believing that there's going to have to be some type of divine intervention to deal with the issues that we have.
Yes.
You know.
Because we can't get them jobs in 14
Right.
days. We can't do that. But in 14 days, we can engage them. In 14 days, we can bless them.
Right.
In 14 days, we can begin to listen to them. What happens if every Wednesday night at 9 p.m. in a certain place, 20 of y'all are there in an open forum? Right. And here's the question. What's the ask?
By 14 days later, we'll be able to have a voice that represents them.
Ask. Do something.
Let's do it.
The one problem that I see is that the people that we want to reach, that she wants to reach, they're not coming to the churches. They're not coming to.
Well, that's why we say we go to them. We go to them.
So if we were willing to do that every night or whenever down there, that's where they're going to gather. We try to have meetings other places, and they're not coming there.
We're asking them for a 14-day hold the peace.
And I agree that we can try it because I have enough. I think there's enough of us that know enough of them that are part of that.
I'll give you an example. One young man last night, when we're trying to talk him down, I say to him, "Hey brother, look man, we're all fighting for an end." His reply to me is that I'm not here for the end, I'm here for the fight. I'm only here for the fight.
Well, the one thing that I did get the elders to acknowledge today is that they dropped the ball and that they haven't let these young people know that they're valuable, that they're worthy, that they matter. I mean, even I said to all of them, why do you keep saying, don't shoot me? You're fronting something you don't want. How about hands up, see me? How about hands up, I matter?
So I've been trying to figure out, and you can do this. So here's my ask, because you've asked me. I like the way you say that, by the way. I've been trying to figure out, because that hands up, don't shoot. My thought was it didn't work for Mike Brown. I don't want us to take something that has basically.
Well, no justice, no peace. We've been saying that for 30 years, and
right.
That's exactly what we have. No justice,
and no peace. Right. So my ask is formulate a new slogan.
Hands up, see me.
Yeah.
Hands up, I matter.
Yeah.
How about see me?
Right.
Just see me. Don't fear me, don't shoot me, don't hate me.
Yeah.
Just see me. Because if I see you, then I become responsible for what I see.
Right.
They're not even being seen right now.
Right.
They're not even being seen. They're not being heard.
So there's a young man, one of the young men I found when I said you were here. He went from let's fight and die tonight to really? I've read all her books. Where is she? Get me down there right away. So I'll be glad for you to meet with him tonight.
But this brother makes a good point. If you want to ask people to give up the fight, you got to have a good option. Because some people are in it just for the fight.
Just for the fight.
And that's a great point.
Let you know what else he said. What else he said. Now this is a brother for the last 2 nights. He's got arrested. Last 2 nights he's got extracted by the police. And when I went to him last night to say, hey bro, come on man, you're a leader, you don't know your power. He told me, yes I do. I know exactly why I'm here. I know what I'm here to do. I have bail money. So I'm going to jail. 30 minutes later, he went to jail. That's his mentality.
Oh yeah, but a warrior has to fight for a value or principle.
And that's all.
For what value or principle is he going to jail for?
Yeah.
We just ask the question.
You know what? The kids,
and then let's teach him values and principles that he can
and that's
live and not have to go to jail for. What's the value? Warrior stands for value and principle.
Repeat what you just said about the end game. That's good.
Dear Queen, that's what I sit at your feet for. I've followed you and God has blessed you with wisdom to help us here. These 2 of the kids that got arrested, I wish you would have been here. And I'm a curse, so please forgive me, because I'm going to repeat them. He said, our slogan, if you're not dying in this bitch, you might as well be dead.
If you're not dying,
dying in this bitch, in the game, the life, then you're already dead.
What is the underlying principle of that slogan? That's all we have.
And I asked them, and I promise, this is why I throw up my hands. I'm beyond.
But see, they're fighters and not warriors. You got to train them how to be warriors.
This kid, I bet you, if you put a calculus test in front of him, so bright, man. My heart was bleeding, and I told him, I said, man, just hold off till tomorrow. I'm gonna get you to the queen.
Bro?
You know, but his whole process was.
We were there at that parking lot, but the other one I remember was a mall parking lot, and all the police had assembled
Oh yeah, so you were down there. Exactly. With all the tanks and stuff. Yeah, so you made it to that parking lot. Right. Okay, yeah. Well, that's where Yana had her outburst because everybody made it to that staging area. I think that was the general staging area where you would first get onto the property. Then we had to walk from there. Mm-hmm. Like you left your cars there and you did the rest of the way. Right. You and the crew had to walk through the tanks and all the guard posts and all that down into the street where the actual disturbances occurred. So we walked through all of that, which was surreal, brother. It was just surreal. And then got to the site and the lights went up and Ayana met with the crowd. The brother Tim that's in jail from at the time was the son involved in Sweetie Pies, which was a hit on OWN at the time. Right. Well, he was out there with Ayana that night and they were doing a whole thing with the lights up in the crowd and it was just surreal to be at the site of that. It was surreal.
Yeah. Who are you going to ask? You actually want to go to school board meeting. Hey, fellas. Hey, let me say something to y'all, man. A lot of y'all know who I am. I'm 35 years old. I've been on both sides of the fence, man. For the first time, I've been St. Louis my whole life besides in prison. All right? This is the first time I can say I've seen this stick together on any damn thing. So with that being said, man, we got a voice, and we are strapped right now with numbers. But our numbers will get weakened if we go to jail. All right, and we can't think our way through this and we got to figure out what we want. Like she asked me what I want. I don't know what I couldn't even answer right now. We're just mad. And we gotta take the time to figure out what the hell we want. But we gotta stay out here. We gotta stay out here. Look, for the time being right now, we gonna stay in our home for as long as it's stay because it's free to assemble out here. And if y'all really want to help, y'all can bring us some water, bring us some food, because we out here all night.
No, we also ask to be respectful to the
Can I ask this question? First of all,
let's just keep it 100, my brother, you know what I'm saying? 10 of us just in a crowd, just standing in one spot, not doing nothing. To me, that's unacceptable. That's unacceptable to me for what? What are you doing? You
we walking around for us right here. We need to be walking around.
Walking is fine. Walking is fine.
We did that.
Walking is fine.
West Forest and over with, bro. They blocked the public off. This is for us now. We just doing it for us and the cameras. They raping the culture with the media and all these cameras, bro. It's the equivalent. It's the equivalent to shooting a video in somebody's hood and you not from there.
Hold on 1 second. What? Okay. 14 days to pause and get clear.
Yeah, I had never seen that assembly of military presence before, because the police were essentially the military at that event, you know, with everything that's going on. So that was just surreal, like you say.
But even the first day, remember the first day, that parade on the first day in the street, that first day?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Getting out of that car, or the vehicle, going back to the meeting from when we first landed and got to the hotel. Were you there in the lobby for that meeting?
I was in the lobby for that meeting, yeah.
That's right. And they suggested that we not get separated from our group.
Yeah.
Because if we got separated, that they wouldn't be able to come get us. And so for me, it became very real at that point. I thought, oh, wow, this is serious. This is not a game. It's not a test.
I wasn't prepared for the level of crowd that Iyanla attracted. I didn't even know people would know who she was. The cameras just attracted a mob. What felt like a mob when you were in it. It was beautiful for television. It was really meaningful for television.
Iyanla Van Zant. Iyanla Van Zant, life coach on the Oprah Show, on the Oprah Network.
You the son? Nice to meet you.
We gotta go
What's up, homie? Now, let me get off the white phone. I thought you were speaker.
I know, right?
All right.
Oh, she got it up there. Wow.
You got it. All right. Praise and honor to our ancestors each and every day. give praise and honor to those who paved the way for us. We give praise and honor to the spirit of the fallen ones. We give praise and honor to you, Michael Brown. We thank you. We know that your spirit calls for peace. We give peace to your mother, Leslie, today. Peace to your father, Michael, today. Peace to the brothers that look like you today. We ask that you lift your spirit in peace, that you cover us in peace, that you be with us in peace, that you lift us in peace, that you bring peace to Ferguson, that it spreads to St. Louis, that it goes up to Detroit, that it crosses over to Philly, that everything peaceful be associated with Michael Brown. That your life shall not be in vain. We shall lift you worldwide. That you shall be known as a life that was given to bring peace to all African American men that look like you. They shall be seen. They shall be heard. They shall be counted. They do matter.
They do matter.
Raise our hands. You will see us. We thank you, Michael.
Thank you, Michael.
We thank you for the sacrifice.
Thank you, Michael.
We thank you, Michael.
Thank you.
For waking us up.
That's right.
We thank you, Michael.
Thank you, Michael.
We love you, Michael.
We
miss you, Michael.
Yes.
We pray peace in your name.
Yes.
We let it be so.
Let it be. So it is.
So it is.
So it is.
Amen. Thank you, honey.
Amen. So while we're right here, I thank you as I did the other day for just allowing me to come into your community.
We love to have you. Love you.
Last night, I had a beautiful experience with 13 young men. I don't know if
They're here.
they're here.
They're here.
Frankie.
13 young men. I met 2 others today.
D, where you at, D?
They've got a voice. Yes. They've got a message.
Yes. Where you at, Chip J? Where you at? Wrong one.
And this is what I want to say to you. Let me go here. Excuse me, Michael.
Let these brothers in.
Somebody, I don't know who. But somebody will benefit from you remaining disorganized. Can you hear me?
Yes.
I don't know who. So we're not calling no names. We don't care. But somebody will benefit from you remaining disorganized. And since we know that this thing has an effect on our young men, I say hear their voices.
Yes.
Every organization, y'all have got to come together. I don't know where, I don't know how. I didn't come to tell you how to do your business. Just handle your business.
Can we benefit from being organized?
You are small enough, Ferguson, that you can do it and do it quickly.
She has a microphone.
Pastor King, raise your hand. I'm sorry.
Portable? Yeah.
So,
Stationary.
I met in this church last night. Where's my community board that we sat with together? The teachers, the educators.
Minister,
you got
pastor,
to organize. You have to. Don't try to raise a hero. Find collective voices. Who's going to work on education? Who's going to work on finances? Who's going to work on community protection?
Watch your back, everybody. Watch your back.
Find that and find the collective voice. Here's our plan.
Watch your back.
Pause so you can get clear. We're asking for 14 days of peaceful protest. Loop in the young'uns that are acting a little wonderful. Pat them on the butt, tell them stop it.
All right. That's right.
All the grandmothers, you grab them little wild young'uns and just pop them right on their butt.
All right.
Say, stop that. No, we're not doing that. Okay? Pause for clarity. Plan. What is next? What is next?
Prepare.
Wait a minute. What are you going to do Monday?
Prepare.
What are you going to do on Monday? You got to know now. You got to know where you're walking, where you're marching, where you're going to meet, where you're going to end up. Don't give them an excuse to determine how you grieve.
That's right. That's right.
What you going to do on Monday? Talk in your group.
There's a room right here.
Talk in your church.
There's a room right here.
You got to prepare.
Room right here.
Benzino.
You got to prepare. What's the next move? Can I say this? Justice is going to take time. I am an attorney. It's not going to happen next week. Can you give it 14 days? Can you give it 14 days? And if it doesn't happen in 14 days, prepare what you're going to do. Okay? It's not going to happen. It takes time. Then participate. Raise money. Gather the youth. Meet with the youth. One thing at a time. You can do this. You can do this. But you've got to talk to each other. And if you can't talk to each other, nobody's going to listen to us. Nobody.
Before the police come.
We are not concerned about police in this moment. I talked to Benzino. Love and Hip Hop, Atlanta. He made a commitment to me that he's going to call out the hip hop artists to change their message.
Yeah, to be there, right, at the site, that was powerful for me, and that energy. I've only felt that one other time in the last maybe 10 years. It was powerful. When we got out of those vehicles and I stepped out, and it was a wave, and that was one of the, I'll always remember that.
Always, brother. And remember the community activist meeting we had at that place, outside on that porch-like structure?
Oh, yeah, that's right.
Remember that?
It was a restaurant.
Yeah, it was at some restaurant or something, right? And we were out on the porch part.
Right.
They had some kind of meeting with the activists and stuff out there, and it was very interesting to see what she was able to do while we were there.
Remembering, were there some other folks at the meeting who were white folks from the community who were trying to understand what was going on?
I do believe, if I remember correctly, that and I have some pictures, I'll go back and look at them, that it was a mixed crowd, but I remember it was some townspeople that we could wrestle up. There was a bit of a panel, I remember that. And then we had an audience of some folks, and she asked and answered some questions. Because she had met earlier with the chief of police separately, and she had met with both sides of the issue, and then this was the town's hall with the community meeting. That's what it was billed as. But anyway, brother, it was good to talk to you about some of these remembrances. It's good to know where we both come from, and that's the milieu in which we know each other. This show fixed my life.
Right. That's the kind of thing that, when you go through, we had some experience. That was,
for sure.
Some very emotional things. There was a sense of danger and then a sense of joy.
Yeah, right, exactly.
Yeah, absolutely.
Are there other people, other than your cousin who's an actor, are there other people in your family that work in the entertainment business?
Nope, not ASO.
Right, and the same is true on my side in my family. So your work to them looks glamorous just because there's nobody else in the family that's involved in that, and it has to do with something that they watch every day. So there's a fascination with them and you and that. They don't necessarily realize or think that when it is your profession, blessedly, that there are things that just stick to your ribs and things that don't. And certain things in the television world just don't stick to my ribs. It's just work that you do because it comes across your desk. But this fixed my life. It was the first and only show that I've been able to completely integrate my spirituality with my profession. I've never been able to do that before and function at that level before. You know, I'd get in what I could. I would see little opportunities to get in what I could, but not the way I was able to shape what you saw and experienced on that show.
That sounds like bliss. Right there, to be in that place. Like the dream is always running ahead, to be in it for a moment. And you were very locked in and focused. I'm just watching you write notes on the cards, and I would just smile. I was like, yeah, he's doing this thing. He's doing this thing. But I enjoy that. Sometimes when you see somebody who's really in their way, so I can just watch them and appreciate it and smile. So,
yeah, man. I always felt like I was. I felt like I was doing in the moment, like I was doing God's work. I felt it. I knew it. I knew it was important, and I just wanted to be in it, and I was totally in it, and it was all joy to me. Were there problems along and bumps along the road? Absolutely. That's life. But I felt like every minute was just a blessing for me. What was it all about for you, that experience, the Fix My Life journey in your career?
It was about feeling really good about what I was doing, that it had some purpose, that it was intentional. That's what it was about. When the people who are in the positions above you have responsibility above you are committed to what they're doing, and they're really, it means something to them, then if after 14 hours, I feel like I can't be tired if you're not tired. If you're going, I'll follow you. Whatever to facilitate what you need, I'll do it. And so to be in that, to have that sense of purpose, finding what it is, having that meaning, and living in a way that you honor yourself and that purpose. I think that would be the way I would sum it up and how it made me feel and what it attempted to bring to other folks.
Well said, brother. As a filmmaker, does it and did it and how does it help you to tell a story, what you've witnessed and experienced on this series? How does it help you as a filmmaker?
Really, the importance of listening to people. Not directly what they say, but maybe perhaps how they talk in circles around things. And I was listening to a clip from Iyanla this morning, and she called the thing a thing and made something very plain. So as a storyteller, recognizing how people communicate with each other, and the emotion part is that you, especially, she was very engaged in that. And so you want to give people information, but it has to resonate. I think it has to come from a place of emotion of some kind, of some concern, truly wanting the best for people.
Find yourself to love.